The front door clicked open, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was supposed to be a casual Friday dinner, a routine gathering of family friends to mark another passing season. But the woman who stepped through the threshold was not the familiar, comfortable presence who had populated my childhood memories. Eleanor stood in the golden wash of the foyer light, her coat draped over her arm, revealing the emerald green silk slip beneath. The fabric hung like liquid shadow, catching every subtle curve of her frame as she moved. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, sudden gasp that I barely managed to silence before it left my lips. Her gaze swept over the hallway, skipping past the familiar paintings and the coat rack until it locked directly onto me. There was no hesitation in those amber brown eyes. She didn't look at my mother, who was busy calling out a warm welcome from the kitchen over the sound of sizzling oil. No, her attention belonged entirely to me. Her gaze drifted down the length of my dark navy shirt, taking in my rigid posture, before returning to meet my eyes with a slow, deliberate intensity. A quiet, teasing tilt touched the corner of her lips as she noticed the white-knuckled grip I had on the wooden banister. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, completely insulated from the domestic noise of the house. It was a look that bypassed years of polite boundaries, reading every wild, forbidden thought currently racing through my mind. "You look frozen," she said, her voice a low, melodious murmur that barely carried across the short distance between us, yet felt as loud as thunder in my chest. I couldn't find my voice, merely swallowing hard as she took a single step closer, the faint scent of sandalwood and rain-damped silk swirling into my personal space. The kitchen had become too crowded, the atmosphere too heavy with things I couldn't say. So I retreated to the narrow confines of the pantry under the pretense of finding another bottle of wine. The space was small, smelling of dried lavender, aged wood, and the cool copper of old cookware. I reached for a bottle on the top shelf, my heart rate finally beginning to settle into a normal rhythm, when the door creaked behind me. The light vanished for a split second as a shadow crossed the threshold, and then the door clicked softly shut. Eleanor stood there, the small space instantly evaporating. The emerald green silk of her dress brushed against my dark trousers, a soft, sliding whisper of fabric that made my skin tingle beneath my clothes. She didn't apologize for crowding me. Instead, she reached up toward the shelf just beside mine, her bare arm brushing against mine. The contact was warm, electric, and entirely devastating. I stood frozen, my back pressed slightly against the wooden shelving as she lingered in my space. Her breath was warm against my collarbone, smelling faintly of the red wine she had been sipping in the living room. "We are a bit cramped in here," she whispered, her amber-brown eyes looking up at me through her dark lashes, filled with a dangerous, playful curiosity. I kept my hands firmly gripped on the edge of the shelf behind me, terrified that if I moved even an inch, my fingers would find the soft curve of her waist. I managed only a tight nod, my eyes locked on the small beauty mark just below her collarbone, which rose and fell with her steady, agonizingly calm breathing. The dining room was filled with the lively chatter of my mother sharing old stories. But the space between Eleanor and me had become an island of silence. I sat directly across from her, the flickering candlelight reflecting in the dark depths of her eyes like tiny, burning embers. Every time she reached for her glass or adjusted her posture, the emerald green silk shifted, catching the warm light and drawing my gaze like a moth to a flame. I tried to focus on my plate, to nod and smile at the right moments, but my mind was entirely consumed by her presence. Eleanor wasn't playing the part of the polite family friend anymore. She watched me with an intense, unblinking focus, taking slow sips of her wine, while her thumb lightly traced the rim of her glass. It was a repetitive, hypnotic movement that felt incredibly intimate. Whenever my mother looked away to fetch something from the kitchen, Eleanor would lean forward slightly, the neckline of her dress dipping just enough to make my throat go dry. She was waiting for me to break, testing the limits of my composure. I reached for my own glass, my fingers trembling slightly as I lifted it to my lips. She caught the tremor, a tiny, knowing smile gracing her lips as she leaned back, entirely satisfied with her power over me. "You seem very quiet tonight," she remarked to the room, though her eyes remained locked on mine, challenging me to speak the truth in front of everyone. I swallowed the wine, the burn in my throat matching the heat in my chest as I muttered something about being tired, knowing full well she saw straight through the lie. I stepped out into the quiet hallway, seeking a moment of cool air to steady my racing pulse. The sound of my mother's laughter faded into the background, replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle patter of rain against the window pane. But the quiet didn't last. A soft rustle of silk announced her arrival before I even turned around. Eleanor stepped into the hallway, closing the distance between us until there was barely any air left to breathe. She stopped so close I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. The emerald green dress shimmered in the low, warm light of the hallway lamp, highlighting the elegant slope of her shoulders. I looked down at her, the barrier of my restraint fraying at the edges. My hand rose instinctively, my fingers hovering just inches from her cheek, wanting nothing more to feel the softness of her skin, to trace the line of her jaw and lose myself in the warmth of her gaze. Her breath hitched, her amber-brown eyes widening slightly as she saw the raw longing in my face. For a second, The playful confidence faded, replaced by something much deeper, much more vulnerable. She didn't pull away. She tilted her head slightly, leaning into the space where my hand hovered, an unspoken invitation hanging between us. But the sudden sound of a cabinet closing in the kitchen broke the spell. I pulled my hand back, my fist clenching at my side, as the cold reality of the barrier crashed down upon us. We stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what we had almost done settling over us like a physical weight. The storm outside intensified, throwing sheets of water against the glass as we found ourselves alone in the study, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. The heat from the flames bathed the room in a rich orange glow, softening the sharp edges of the tension that had held us captive all evening. Eleanor sat on the edge of the leather sofa, a dark woolen blanket draped over her shoulders, though the emerald green silk of her dress still peeked through, a constant reminder of the fire she carried with her. She looked different in the firelight, less like an untouchable force of nature and more like someone carrying her own quiet weight. I sat on the opposite end of the sofa, my arm resting on the back, watching the flames dance across her face. "I always felt like I had to be perfect," she murmured, her voice soft, devoid of the teasing tone from earlier, as she stared into the embers. "People expect me to have everything figured out, but sometimes I feel entirely lost in my own life." The confession was quiet, a piece of her soul offered up in the darkness of the study. It wasn't a game or a challenge. It was raw, genuine vulnerability. I slid closer, the space between us shrinking until our knees almost touched. "I know what it's like to feel trapped by expectations," I replied, my voice low and steady, my hazel eyes locked on to her profile. She turned her head, her amber brown eyes searching mine, finding an understanding that went far beyond our age gap or the roles we were supposed to play. In that quiet room, surrounded by the sound of rain, the forbidden barrier felt thin enough to break with a single breath. The house had finally grown silent, my mother having retired upstairs hours ago, leaving the ground floor enveloped in a quiet, dark stillness. I wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water, thinking the cool liquid might wash away the lingering heat of the evening. But as I rounded the corner, I saw her. Eleanor was leaning against the dark granite counter, the emerald green silk of her dress catching the faint, cool light of the open refrigerator before she closed it, plunging us back into the warm, singular glow of the pendant light overhead. She turned to face me, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't startle. She simply watched me approach, her amber-brown eyes holding mine in the semi-darkness. The silence of the sleeping house wrapped around us, making every breath, every heartbeat feel amplified. She took a slow sip from her glass, her eyes never leaving my face as she set it down on the counter with a soft click. "Don't go back upstairs just yet," she whispered, the words hanging in the cool night air like a promise. The request was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken desires. I stepped closer, my hand resting on the cold granite just inches from her hip, my body leaning in until I could smell the sweet, intoxicating scent of her perfume mixed with the rain from outside. I stayed, my voice barely a breath against the quiet of the room, matching her gaze with a determination that surprised us both. She smiled, a soft, genuine expression that let me know the invitation was entirely real. The dying embers of the fire cast a deep, red glow across the study, turning the room into a sanctuary of shadows. We stood in the center of the space, the distance between us completely gone. The tension that had been building all night, stretching from the moment she first walked through the door in that green dress, had reached its absolute breaking point. There were no more words left to shield us, no more polite excuses to hide behind. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against her cheekbone. Her skin was incredibly warm, and she let out a soft, shaky breath, her eyes closing for a brief second as she leaned into my touch. When she opened them, the amber-brown depths were filled with a wild, beautiful intensity that mirrored the storm in my own chest. My thumb gently traced her lower lip, feeling the slight parting of her breath against my skin. "I can't keep pretending," I whispered, the confession tearing from my throat, raw and unadorned. Eleanor didn't answer with words. She reached up, her hands tangling in the hair at the back of my neck, pulling me down until our lips were agonizingly close, our breath mingling in the dark space between us. The world outside, my mother sleeping upstairs, the rules we were supposed to follow, all of it faded into nothingness. There was only the warmth of her skin, the rustle of the green silk, and the terrifying, beautiful realization that we had finally crossed the line. The cool, gray light of dawn filtered through the frosted glass of the front door, bringing with it the harsh reality of the morning. Eleanor stood by the door, her beige trench coat pulled tightly over her shoulders, though a small flash of the emerald green silk still showed at her collarbone. A quiet badge of the night we had shared. The house was quiet, the rest of the world still asleep. But everything between us had permanently shifted. She had her hand on the brass doorknob, but she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she turned to look back at me, standing in the shadows of the hallway. There was no teasing playfulness in her eyes now, only a deep, quiet understanding that mirrored my own thoughts. The physical tension of the night had resolved into a sweet, agonizing suspension, a shared secret that would linger in every glance, every touch from this moment forward. We didn't say goodbye, nor did we promise to keep quiet. We didn't need to. The silence between us was filled with the memory of the firelight, the touch of her skin, and the knowledge that the barrier had been broken. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her lips parting as if to speak, before she turned and stepped out into the cool morning air. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the quiet hallway, my heart still beating to the rhythm of her touch, knowing my life would never be the same again.